Hello, good morning. Welcome to another CAD session. This is episode 5. My name's Dave Johnston. I'm a production manager. I've been doing AutoCAD for over a decade now. I use it primarily to solve production-related problems. I'm joined again by some fantastic guys. We've got Dom. Hello, say hello, Dom.
Hello, hello, good morning again. Welcome back, and welcome to the LinkedIn guys as well who are joining us for a second week.
Fabulous. And tell us about yourself, Dom.
I do production CAD, I do lighting design, and yeah, that's what I do. We can bring shows alive is what I do.
Fantastic. And also Tom, we have Tom White with us again.
Good morning, I'm Tom White. I do technical design drawings in CAD for live events and theatre productions.
Fabulous. And we've got Dick Crabb with us again. Say hello, Dick.
Hello, my name's Dick Crabb. I'm a sound engineer, sound designer. I receive plans from the likes of Tom and Dominic, stick my layers on and send them back. And I'm trying to learn from these guys what to do, how to do it better. And I'm really learning so much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Dick. So today we are going to recap on last week, which I've just realized in my notes here is wrong. Last week we did blocks. So we'll do the briefest of recaps on blocks. And then we're going to look at printing drawings. So printing drawings is something that we get asked to do all the time. Oh, could you just give me a PDF of this? Or, oh, could you just give me a PDF of that? Oh, it needs to be A4. Could it be A3? I need an A1. I need an A0. And we're just going to talk a little bit about how to do some of this and some of the tricks and things you need to watch out for, because often someone will send through a drawing to us and ask us just to print it off. And sometimes it's not as easy as they think just to print it off, depending on the state of the drawing that we get sent through. So yeah, but before we do that, we thought we would just take a moment to just discuss the industry. We all work as freelancers and we charge a day rate for our services. And I don't know about the other guys, but certainly for me, that part of my work is completely dried up for the moment. And potentially it's not going to come back in quite the same way. How about you guys? Dom, what do you think? What's sort of happened in your world?
Yeah, like you, it all dried up. It all dried up very, very quickly. I think it's going to take a while to come back, but I also think we need to learn to work differently and work smarter. And I think I'll travel like you, and I'm sure Dick and Tom. I travel a lot. Most of my work is outside the UK, and I go on site surveys. I go on production meetings. I then go and do the show. Kind of made 2 or 3 trips before we get to show day. And I think something that you and I have worked on together over the last year and I have done is to change the workflow. And I now laser scan with your support, and I go to arenas, and we've been to Oakland and San Francisco, we've been to Athens and Paris and various other places. And I've got a good workflow now of scanning and creating a set of documents that everyone can use in the production flow. And I'm hoping that will help shows get back on the road. We'll be able to provide plans and things that not everyone has to get on a plane, and particularly if we can't all get on a plane and social distance. And I'm thinking for Europe, I'm quite happy to get in the car and drive to, say, Paris or Amsterdam and do the scan, come back, process the data, and then we've got an accurate set of not 2D, 3D full working plans and workflow. I learned last year that we can supply those details on to so many other people doing 3D fly-throughs and renders, and it's not just for CAD. And our ability to supply really good, solid information from maybe a 2 or 3 day scanning exercise would stop or negate a lot of people having to get on a plane, because people must really understand we end up with the data and the CAD plans. We also end up with pictures. We also end up with the ability to allow people to measure off our photographs the scanner takes. And so all that information comes back from one trip. And I think, and I hope, because I enjoy that side of my workflow, I think that's going to hopefully be the way forwards. We can allow people and shows to happen without everyone having to get on a plane beforehand.
Amazing. Thanks, Tom. And how about you, Tom? Like, what sort of happened to your work, and how do you kind of see it coming back, or what are your thoughts on how things look moving forward for the next 3-6 months?
It's a fascinating question, and I look forward to looking back to this point and wondering if I was vaguely correct. I think I fully agree with Dom, and I presume that vaguely over the next 6 months I would have little or no work, I'd guess. I'm lucky enough just to have one last project that I'm finishing over the next few weeks for a project in a couple of years' time. But I think I fully agree with everything that Dom said, and I remember my analogy of the whole how do you prevent less people going on site is I remember buying my first property. It was before Street View on Google Street View was available, so I'd drive around and I'd check this house out or that house out, and then moving on to my next property, Google Street View was available. You could just do it from your living room, and I was like, okay, that's awesome. And so in the same circumstances you were mentioning about maybe fewer people being able to travel to Paris, for example. The 3D scanning is amazing for that, and I think that will have to be used an awful lot more in the future.
Fabulous. How about you, Dick? What are your thoughts? Like, what's happened to your work sort of currently, and then how do you see your particular role as a sound designer and sound engineer? How do you see that kind of coming back?
Yeah, so as with everybody, mine has completely stopped. I'm expecting the big autumn shows to go. So Cybos has certainly gone. Gartner, I think, is still up in the air, but we know VM's gone, and that was the same time. So I'm not looking at anything in the immediate future. But what I do think, and I don't know if there was anybody who listened to Naomi Venable's communications session yesterday on the Left's group. And she was talking about communications and simplicity of message. And one of the things that she was talking about was how do technicians get information across to the kind of account directors who want a very, very simple message. And some of the stuff that I've been working on using your inputs, I think gives me the ability to give a very simple pictorial message to the high level people who just want a simple message. And I think there's a lot that we can actually learn in this downtime about internally communicating and giving simple messages that, as Dom said, allow us to work remotely, but do a much better job.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dick. Let's I hope you don't mind us just taking a couple of minutes out there just to kind of talk about some of the way that our lives are being affected quite significantly at the moment by everything that's going on, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone out there, really. So yeah, let's go on with the CAD. We've taken slightly longer over that, so we won't do a recap. If you want to go back and see episode 4, it is available on the YouTube channel. It's also available through LinkedIn and through Facebook. So yeah, please do take a moment to go back if you want to find out more about blocks. It was actually blocks rather than XREFs as written below. So today we're going to look at printing drawings in more detail. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and jumping straight in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. So as Dave mentioned, and I think Dom gets the same question, it's a very fair question people ask us to print drawings, whether that means physically a piece of paper, but more than likely just a PDF, because often DWG viewers aren't necessarily available on their platform. So for example, if you're using a Mac predominantly, it's sometimes slightly harder, except for there is something called Autocad Dwg Viewer, which is a web-based program which I find incredibly useful. That if it's totally free, it's written and made by Autodesk. I find it incredibly useful to view DWGs online and also share DWGs as well. So this is an example where I have been sent a drawing. I don't know anything about it. I've never worked on the project before, but somebody has asked, can I produce a PDF, because they're running into a meeting in half an hour's time. And there's just a few things that I obviously say, yes, of course I can help, because there's always a chance it might turn into work at a later date. But they ask, how do I produce a PDF of it? and hopefully this might help some people to go through that process. So I believe in episode 1 or 2 there was a description of model space and maybe paper space. So model space is what I'm viewing here. Quite often people use a black background, but you can have if you're seeing a drawing in a space such as this, you're probably looking at it in model space. Model space is often where you produce the drawing, so you produce the text or you produce a line, and we desire to produce it as a PDF. And often a good way of producing a PDF is something you can come back to time and again. So you can, if you choose to, do Control P as in plot or print from here. But the problem is that you have to do the process time and again every time you wanted to update the drawing. So you use something called layout, which is down in one of these tabs here. And the layout is a constant view of what you're drawing. So I desire to do a few checks on this. So when I bring a drawing in such as this, I want to do a few checks. We can use the layer manager. You can see the colors of elements. You can see whether the line weights are thicker than desired. So one of the things that is a good double check is down on the toolbar at the bottom, you can show or hide the line weight, and you can clearly see what was quite a pretty drawing to be something quite potentially unreadable when you produce the PDF. So to rectify something like that, we can go to the layer manager, and on the buildings layer, this just needs to be changed to a thinner line weight. And in this circumstance, I'm going to do the hatch to a thinner line weight as well. And so
I just see you're clicking the default there. Have you set that default up somewhere already? Or how is that? What defines what that default is, and what's the right sort of default to set?
I think you're entirely right. It's set up somewhere else. I think a default that's under 0.2 of a millimeter is a sensible place to start. And obviously, then the more you go into printing drawings, the more you might desire to make it slightly lighter. If you go down to something like I don't know what the smallest one is, 0.05 of a millimeter. Sometimes, depending on which color you choose, it's a little bit too difficult to read. Often I'm producing 3D drawings at this stage, and I often, to produce an A3 drawing, which is a technical representation of what the designer chooses to design, I use 0.2 of a millimeter, because it's kind of a middle ground. It's not too thick that you don't really know where you're going, and it's not too thin that when you produce an A4 drawing, when you print it at home, in comparison to an A3 where it's meant to be set up, it's kind of a middle ground.
Dom, do you have a sort of similar rule of thumb or anything, or something that you tend to use?
I think
to print all right.
The classic thing I crash into a lot of the time is people printing from home or on slightly cheaper printers, and the thinner you get, the line will disappear. So I think, as Tom says, a kind of 0.2 protects yourself of when you don't know where the PDF's going. And quite often you'll share a PDF with a producer, and then it gets sent on, and then you get this message, I can't read it, because it's just not showing up. So, yeah.
Perfect. And in terms of colours, have you noticed any particular colours that tend to be absolute horrors for printing out?
Yellow. Don't use yellow. Same with PowerPoint. Don't use yellow. It disappears.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Stay away from it.
I agree with yellow as an issue, but often if you were being sent a drawing that had yellow in the model space, it's more than likely because there's something called a plot style that should have been sent with your drawing, and the quick override is just changing the yellow to any other color. But there's something called a plot override, and it produces that company's desired line color and line weight for a specific color. So if you see yellow, that probably is the reason for it. But yes, you can quickly go to the layer property manager and just click on the color and change it from green to blue or yellow to something else.
And again, that's where, if you've organized your drawing properly in using the layers, and if you created things using the blocks properly as well, then all of that will just change right over your drawing. Whereas if the drawing that's been sent to you, someone says, oh, could you just print this out for me, please? Because they know that you do CAD, but that actually someone else has produced the drawing. That's where, if they haven't done it, then actually that, oh, could you just print this, suddenly becomes a 5-hour job while you try and tidy up the drawing first to get it into a place that it can be printed in a useful way.
And just a really quick visual representation of what Dave just explained. So I on the flying layer, I've chosen to do it green, but Dave doesn't like green, he likes magenta, so I changed it to magenta. But you can see some of the flying lines have stayed green, and the reason for that is rather than those lines being by layer, they've been overridden to a specific color.
Perfect.
So another thing, really, depending on how far in the future the meeting is, another quick check, just in case the job does become real, is I just want to check to whether it's a real 2D drawing or whether it's a 2D stroke 3D drawing, or by total accident, which is super easy to do. Some of these lines have a Z value which is not on this black area. So this black area is 0, and so all these lines should have a Z value of 0, i.e. they're not extruded, they're not floating off the ground. But just a really quick double check is you go to the top left hand corner, our view is currently top, and if you click on the word top, you can go to any of the other ones, so frontic, for example. And so this is a quick double check. You're like, hang on a minute. So you can see the
so
X
Tom,
and
can
Y
I just double
here.
check there? So what did you do there? You typed, what did you type in to get that to flip, or what did you?
So you can type in things if you desire, but I personally use the dialogue in the top left hand corner of the model space,
Cool,
and you
perfect.
see the word top.
Yeah.
The word top, and so this is, you can have different views. So this is used predominantly for 3D drawings, but in this circumstance, I just choose to just have a double check. And is there anything that's totally by mistake? It's normally totally by mistake. There's no one's done anything wrong as such, but it's worth double checking. Is anything floating off the ground?
Yeah.
And so in
perfect.
this circumstance, I've overwritten this on purpose, and
So
I
sorry,
know
Tom,
that it's
just to jump in again. So with that changing of view, like I would actually tend to use the command line. So I would type -V, which sets the view, and then T to set it to the top or to the back or to the side or to the an ISO view, southwest, northeast, or whatever. How about you, Dom?
Yeah.
Just on sort of moving around your views, do you tend to
I'm with
click
Tom.
the top left? You tend to click the top left.
Yeah, it's top left, or using the box in the top right hand corner. I tend to go to quite a lot and just flip it around.
Yeah. Cool.
But I'm also control and hold the middle mouse button and drag my drawing around as well.
Yeah, gotcha.
I've got 3D habits that way as well.
Dom, your audio's gone crunchy. If you wouldn't mind just resetting, if you're there, thanks.
So
Sorry,
just
Tom,
do a visual representation of what Dom was mentioning, and I fully agree with everything he said. You can hold down Shift on the keyboard, and if you have a 3-button mouse, which the middle button is a wheel, you can hold the wheel down, and it will just take a few seconds to load. But essentially, you can just spin around. So how I'm doing this is I'm holding Shift down on the keyboard, and I'm holding the middle scroll wheel down just to move around.
Perfect. And then Tom, just one other thing actually. Just go back into top view for a moment. Just give us a tiny bit, like what are we actually looking at there? Now obviously that's probably quite obvious to us on here, but it may not be obvious to everybody. Like just give us a really quick overview of what we're actually seeing there.
Okay, so what we're seeing, do you mind if I do a layer walkthrough, and I'm going to go to building. So this is a theatre. I think it might be the Bromley Theatre, but I couldn't be entirely, I don't know exactly at this stage. Yeah. But what we're looking is a plan view of a theatre.
Great.
So if
so
I
that's
just
kind of the
that
stage in the middle there, and then the wings off to the left
and
the right. Yeah. And
so
then
I presume there must be
to the bottom end of that drawing.
Absolutely. So there must be some stage traps. There must be an orchestra lift, I believe.
Yeah.
You're looking at the center line of the theatre. You're looking at these must be the extreme sight lines of the front row, I believe.
Yeah.
I presume that must be the front edge of the stage when the orchestra pit's not used. LX booms on here.
And then all the green dotty lines, all the green little lines. What are those? And that's
so
bit that we make a lot of use of.
Yeah, so stage right end of the flybar, stage left end of the flybar, and just the center line as well.
Perfect. And just for people that don't know what a flybar is, again, it's just one of those things. Like there's quite a range of people watching in the audience.
So in a theatre, often you would have fixed elements of scenery, which are often called portals. And basically, it's like a camera view. So you might have a portal, and generally it's used as masking, and the masking might be for actors, or it might be for lighting booms, which are vertical lighting bars which are placed on the stage floor. And then in addition to that, those are permanent things which might be screwed down to the floor. In addition to that, you might have flown scenery. So you might have a gauze, which is an item which could be used as a projection surface, or it could be used as a lighting state of when the audience
so the
comes
bars
in.
basically come down and come up over the stage, and then all of those lines represent how far up stage and down stage those things come in. So the reason that you would make a lot of use of them on drawing is to kind of position things on the stage, basically.
Exactly. And just the last point on it, you might hear two different types of fly bars. You might hear a counterweight system, which is a fixed position of a fly bar, or in some older theatres, you might hear of a hemp flying system. And the hemp flying system, the position of the bars can be changed if required, not too difficultly.
Amazing. Sorry to sort of detour there. We could probably do a whole session just on theatre and drawings for theatre, but maybe that's for a future date. So sorry, Tom, you were kind of in mid-flow. So we've looked at the floor, the model space, we've looked at the line weights and setting things by color and how well those print, and setting a default and making sure that your layers are set to a default in the model space. But how often would you say you actually print the model space versus printing a paper space for people?
When possible, almost never.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's difficult to replicate it, because often the reason for printing a drawing is to ask somebody a question, and then for me to input their data, whatever that question is. Dave, could you tell me the size of the stage trap? Or Dom, could you tell me the position of the lights? And then they want to have that replicated. And so in my opinion, the problem of printing the model space is it's not very easy to replicate exactly what you've just done. So that's where layouts are quite good at replicating it.
Perfect. So should we move on to paper space? And just aware we've got 8 minutes left.
Yep. Sorry.
It's all right.
So
No, it's
paper,
been a really interesting conversation. I think sometimes we need to maybe plan longer, maybe break things up into smaller sections. I think just so we can not. Yeah.
So where possible, the drawing is produced in what's called model space, and it's an unlimited space. There's no the drawing is a 1-to-1 scale, so 1 point is 1 millimeter in this circumstance. It can be 1 meter, but it's whatever you choose. But the layout is actually a real piece of it's a digital representation of a real piece of paper. So I have personally got 1 model space, and in this circumstance 2 layouts or paper spaces. And the reason is because this is me cheating. This is my title block on an A3 piece of paper, which we'll go through in a second if we've got time. But this here is just a totally blank piece of paper. I've got no idea what size it is. It's got no representation of my model space drawing. So I need to right click on the tab at the bottom here, and I need to go to page setup manager, which is exactly the same as any word processor document or Excel. And I desire to, because this is the first layout here and this first layout here, I desire to modify it. I desire to choose the printer I want to print from. I personally don't have an A3 printer at home, so I always have a DWG to PDF plotter, which is a standard driver supplied by Autodesk for maybe the last 5 or 6 years ish. If you have a version of AutoCAD before then, you might use Adobe PDF, or there's something called Qt PDF, which is a free way of making PDFs. I desire to choose the piece of paper. In this circumstance, the end client has asked for an A3 piece of paper, so I choose that. But just as a visual representation of what it will change to, if I just change it to A4, it's a standard kind of stuff, landscape or portrait and stuff like that. So I'm going to click OK and click close. And I personally drew a rectangle around the A3 piece of paper purely to see what the A4 piece of paper would change in comparison. So let's keep it with an A4 piece of paper. I'm going to delete that rectangle, which has no representation of anything at this stage. And I'm going to draw another rectangle at roughly the paper size. And the only reason I do that is that there's something called zoom extent, which is you can do it as a keyboard entry, which is Z enter, E enter, which is zoom extent, or more often you double click the middle wheel of your mouse. And if you double click the middle wheel of your mouse, it will zoom to everything that's on the page. And I have an Yeah, five times a minute, maybe.
Yeah, zoom extents, zoom all, being the other one, continuously used. Get used to them.
Yeah. So I'll be as quick as I can. So I've got a 4 piece of paper. I've drawn an arbitrary rectangle around it purely so the zoom extents work. So that's how I'm going from here and double clicking the wheel and the zoom extents. I'm going to do new viewport in the command line. So as we talked about last week, if there's anything that you think you know what the words are, but you don't really know what the terminology is, just type it into the command line, and there's a very, very good chance that AutoCAD will try its very best to help you. So in this circumstance, I want to do a new viewport. A new viewport, you draw in exactly the same way as you would a rectangle. So I'm going to start in roughly the top left-hand corner and go to roughly the bottom right-hand corner. And again, double click to zoom extents. And now I have a visual representation of what I have in model space. So if I quickly go to model space and do a few circles, I'm going to go back to layout and you'll see those circles there. So it's a digital representation of what I've just drawn in model space. Okay, so this is, so I've drawn a rectangle purely to have an A4 piece of paper. I've done a viewport. A viewport can be active or not active, or live or not live. So I've got my cursor over the viewport. I'm going to double click within it. I don't know if it was possible to see, but the actual perimeter line got slightly thicker. So now I have control of the model space, even though I'm in layout space. So again, I can zoom around, I can double click to zoom extents, but in this circumstance, I'm going to choose a scale because I know that the production manager desires it to be a specific scale for an A4 piece of paper.
So what we're looking at there is basically a viewport into model space that just appears on paper. Is that right? Is that a sort of
absolutely?
So at the moment, it operates exactly the same as it would as if you were in model space. It just happens to be this view into from paper space.
Which is why I choose to print from the paper space, because it means I can replicate the same drawing multiple times. For example, I've done those 2 circles, but it could be a stage floor or something I could add in. So I'm going to choose a scale. I presume it's going to be about 1 to 200. No, that's a bit too small. So if I do 1 to 150. Okay, so this is a thing that Dom and I were talking.
Why have you chosen those scales? Like what determines? Because sometimes when we get a drawing in, there's all kinds of random scales in there. Sometimes there's been quite a few different. I guess it's gone through different types of units. So the drawing may have gone from inches, or have gone from imperial into metric, and you sometimes get all sorts of random scales. Like why is there a rule of thumb for what scales you tend to use, or?
In the theatre, I would try my very best to do 1 to 25 or 1 to 50, but often with the theatre, you would need to have an A1 piece of paper, which isn't necessarily an easy thing to get hold of a plotter. So when you're doing a live event in I don't know, in Barcelona or something, you might have a 1 to 250 scale to fit on an A3 piece of paper, for example. But in this circumstance, because I've never worked on this project before and I don't know what the end result of this drawing is, I desire to view everything that's produced in model space, even if it's not necessarily viewable. Later on in the process, I might well be able to do a 1 to 25 detail of the downstage edge of the stage. But in this circumstance, I desire to portray to the production manager everything I can see, because the original question was, I can't open the DWG, please tell me what's in it. So I just produce a PDF of everything that's in the model space.
Gotcha. So yeah, so when it's not necessarily a drawing that you've created yourself, someone's just sort of sent it to you and said, "Can you print this out for me, please? Or could you PDF this for me, please?" Which, yeah, again, how often would you say you get that request? I mean, I would often get that at certain times of the year, multiple times a week, but I guess you guys probably get that even more.
Yeah, you're entirely right. It does actually matter what time of the year is, but I could probably maybe 3 times a week at a busy time. And
yeah, how about you, Dom?
I think it's a regular thing, and it's a regular thing when projects are just starting. And as Tom has just so well said, production managers or producers just starting to get their head around things, and they want to know the layout. It's, can you just do me a set of plans of whatever? And you quickly go through the drawing or the arena and do changing rooms, dressing rooms, docks, arena floor, send it across, and it goes quiet for a couple of days, and then the questions start coming back from there. One thing I would say to people who are doing scales and making scales up, make sure the scale you put in your viewport is the scale whoever's on the end of the line has on their scale ruler. Don't invent
That's what
some
I do.
funky scale.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. So I always stick to the scales that are on my, wherever it is, my old school triangular scale rule.
Yeah, so you can have 1 to 25, 1 to 30, but also equally 1 to 25, multiple 10 can be 1 to 250, 1 to 30 can be 1 to 300. But don't go back with 1 to 28. You will not be thanked.
No. And an interesting, I just wanted to mention something that I think Dom agrees is important. So this viewport, because I'm out of it and it's not active, I can zoom to my to my heart's content and zoom in here, and I've found there's a dip trap there, whatever.
So just
I need
explain
to.
that, Tom. So you're saying you're out of it. What do you mean you're out of it at the moment?
So I am, to a certain extent, I'm viewing a piece of A4 paper that happens to be on my computer in comparison. So therefore, I've produced an A4 piece of paper. I've done a viewport, which is viewing the model space, and it's totally locked. I can't edit it. I know that it's 1 to 50.
You're not actually. It's not like you've got that paper space there, and now you're looking through into that model space, and you're working with that model space. Now you've actually double-clicked outside of that viewport, and so now that's sort of locked off that viewport. So that view is basically, is it frozen or locked, or have you not actually locked it at this point? That's a different thing?
At this stage, it's frozen in time,
Yeah.
but I can easily, by accident or on purpose, edit it, and there is a way of preventing that. So if I double click within the viewport on the just below the command line at the bottom, you can see it's still 1 to 150 scale, but by accident I could do one click out and it's changed to an unusual scale. So I need to do within there, I do zoom extent so it's centered to the page. I do to 1 to 150, and then there's a padlock. And padlock is a saving grace because it's saved me so many times. I lock the viewport, so I still technically am in it. And the reason you know it, because the viewport line is slightly thicker around the outside, but I can zoom in and out without affecting the 1 to 150 millimeter, 1 to 150 scale. So I can zoom extend, and it's still that scale. I double click out of it.
And just to jump in there as well, so the other command I use quite a lot is zoom to object. So I might, for example, with your 2 circles there, I might actually select a couple of objects and then zoom to those and then scale from those. So that's that process to get things to scale to the same size consistently across different paper space that you've set up.
That's a fantastic way of doing it, and visually it's quite a nice way of doing it, because it means those 2 circles would be centered to the page, so it looks quite nice when it's printed.
Yeah, if there's something that's always the sort of the center of attention kind of thing to whatever you happen to be drawing. Sometimes with large kind of building drawings, if you're only working within a particular element of that drawing, I find that quite a handy tool just to quickly get it framed correctly in that viewport. So
in a similar sense, can I just interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
If I understand correctly, viewport, for example, in your big theatre, my loudspeakers are relatively small. They, it's kind of like Dom's lights. They're relatively small. So what I want to do is remove a lot of the clutter so that the small things show up against the great extent. And it's viewports that I should be doing that in.
Yeah.
So one way of doing that. One way of doing that is if you desire to turn off the whole of one layer. So, for example, this dotted line here, I believe are stage traps. I could be wrong, but I believe they're stage traps. So I double click into the viewport, and so it's live. You can see the thicker line of the viewport. I go up to the layer command line, and I click on the word freeze. I go into the viewport, and I click on that one line, and it'll freeze purely for this one viewport. It'll freeze all of the layer, which what I think was called track or something like, or
so it's
or
still
lift.
in your model space, and it's still in any other paper spaces that you may have created. And Tom, if you just double click into your model space in this paper space view, you still don't see that frozen layer. It is switched off there, even though we've now clicked into or double clicked into model space. So you can change other things in that drawing, but it's much more tidied up. So yeah, Dick, you could just, for example, look at your sound and the flybars and the basic building, because that might be the level of detail that you need, or you might need a power layer turned on as well. But yeah, you could really kind of get rid of a lot of that superfluous stuff. It also makes your PDF file size is much more manageable for people as well, especially if there's 3D objects that are being used. It just gives you that opportunity to really manage that the quantity and the file size that you're sending around the place.
And maybe if you were to desire to have a safety check, you might produce another viewport. So within one layout or one piece of paper, you can have as many viewports as you desire. Until the drawing is unreadable. But in this circumstance, I've done one viewport which has got the traps turned off because it's beneficial for lighting, but lighting and audio maybe. But in this circumstance, I desire to prove to everyone that there are traps still there because they're important to the production manager. So I've done another viewport here, which I haven't scaled, but at this circumstance, everything is turned on. So when you double click within a viewport and you freeze a layer, it only happens in one viewport. It doesn't happen in all viewports.
So that's just a little bit of
I think
confidence
also
thing,
for Dick, you could use that second viewport and focus the area, say, on an array hang, stage left, stage right. So you could actually have a viewport of the entire theatre. You could do two more and just zoom in on stage left and say, right, separately to give the details of rigging measurements or whatever very easily. And that's as Tom said, you go as many viewports you want, but you can show the details so easily. And it goes back to what we were saying last week, and Turbo said in his Left's talk, if we don't get asked questions from the pans we produce, we win. So very quickly on one sheet of paper, you could show general layout and measurements and detailed measurements of the hang, stage left, stage right, center cluster. And as Tom very quickly did there, he copied his first viewport to a second viewport, and very quickly you can build up a layout without taking much time at all and give really good detail.
And Tom, that was just a sort of Control-C, Control-V, just to copy that viewport as you're starting point, or did you create a new one?
I actually created a new one.
Sorry, Tom. Sorry.
But that was just
you're
to make
entirely
sure
right.
you had everything back in it, right? But whereas if you'd already cleaned it up, for example, and you just got the bits that you wanted, and you were trying to do an exploded version, or sorry, a zoomed-in version of something, then yeah, you might choose, like Dom said, to sort of copy and paste it, because then it remembers all the layers that you've left visible.
No, exactly. As Dom said, I do that all of the time because in this circumstance, the production manager has said, "Oh, I like that a lot, but hang on, can't you turn off the center line?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't really want to go through and turn off all those layers again." So there we go. That's the same one with the center line turned off.
Yeah, perfect. So we're just coming to the end today. So let's just let's take a couple of questions on this. So just give me 1 second. I do think there's quite a bit more that we could be going through in that, but yeah, let's try and make sure we keep the time so that we don't so that people get the rest of their day back. So Tom, when you're producing a paper space and you want to highlight certain areas, like, is there a quick way to sort of just quickly, like in Dick's case, if he just wants to show the speakers and sort of grey out everything else, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so if I were to, I'm going to double click in this main viewport, which is locked. I just want to check that it's locked. I go to the layer property manager. I'm going to on purpose choose all of the layers which I know are to do with this drawing. So I click the first one and I do shift select the last one. I scroll over to the right hand side and somewhere here is going to be viewport color. So on purpose, I'm going to change all the viewport colors to blue. Because Dick feels this is a more appropriate way of portraying this, but at the same time, he says, actually, I want the dip traps, which I'm hoping is on this layer, in red, and I also want it very thick as well, so it's easy to describe to someone. So what this is doing is
in that layer manager, you're not actually looking or affecting anything in model space or anything in any of the other ones. So that isn't the same color as further to the left in that menu you're just showing. It's not the same line weight as further to the left. That's specific to the viewport, correct?
That's correct. And you have to make sure that the viewport that you desire to do the override in is live. So for example, I don't have anything live at this stage, and I could go to the LX layer and scroll to the right hand side, and it's still showing that the viewport color is blue. The line weight's continuous, and the line type and line weights are default and continuous. That's because nothing's live. So if I double click into the one that I've done an override on, you can see that it's red and it's a very thick line.
Gotcha. So you have to double click into that viewport first.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, absolutely. Dick. And
sorry.
No, it was just brilliant. That's exactly what I need. This is my homework for the week.
So how would you use this, Dick? Like, what is it about this that's quite useful in your workflow when you're trying to get sound information across to people?
Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about, of taking away the stuff that just confuses the drawing and emphasizing. So earlier in the talk, I'm guilty of using yellow because it stands out because nobody else uses it in model space. This is a way of me now being able to emphasize what I want to be able to show without changing everybody else's
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful.
And I just had to be I fully agree, it's really powerful, but as we talked about last week with the blocks, it depends on how the drawing is set up originally on how easy it is to do it.
So what sorts of things, Tom, make it more difficult to do, I guess?
So if I was going to go to model space and I'm going to change this dip trap, I'm hoping this is going to work because it would be embarrassing if it didn't, but I'm going to change this to this dip. So the stage left dip trap is now green. I'm going to go back to the model space, and here we go. So Dick is trying to emphasize the dip traps because he's saying, hang on a minute, I don't know where to put my cables, but this is where it goes. In this circumstance, where in model space, the line is changed from by layer to anything else, you don't have as much control. And so I don't know if it's visible here, but this is one way to prove that you don't have so much control, which goes back to the most desirable way of drawing is leaving elements, especially colored elements, the color by layer and not a color override. Because in this circumstance, Dick would be trying to produce this drawing, but the stage left dip trap is green, and people are saying, why is it green? And sometimes it's not entirely obvious why it's green. So that's the reason why you can't override the color.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think the number of times I've been sent a drawing, which is just, and I understand why it happens. Like, people often are producing these things in a rush. They're trying to produce a drawing to solve a particular problem, so they might just make some lazy choices. But it does often mean that further down the line, especially as you're working on more complex jobs, you can really shoot yourself in your foot with this sort of thing. So yeah, just to wrap up, Dom, is there anything from your experience in paper space that you just want to quickly highlight before we finish?
I think in paper space, it's so versatile and you can get your message across so easily. I think the biggest takeaway to give anybody is lock your viewports, because you can get into so much trouble so quickly without locking them. And as Tom showed, it's a very easy click of the button.
Just how do you lock the viewport?
Okay, so either you can select multiple viewports. Oh, you can see that I didn't lock that viewport. So I'm going to select this one viewport without it being live. I can click the padlock on and off, or I can double click within a viewport and I can do padlock on and off.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Tom, if you just want to stop sharing your screen for a moment, we'll finish there for today. I think there is a huge amount more that we could have done, just talking about paper space in particular. So I think we'll take some of the questions that have come in and we'll kind of talk about some of these things and try and work out a way to kind of dig into some more of this. But thank you very much for joining us today. And strangely, Google Hangouts hasn't gone back full screen. Anyway, Tom, do you want to say goodbye?
Thank you so much. Have a nice week.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dom?
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us again. And please send us questions, because it helps us build next week's show. Give us some direction of what we can do to help you all. Would be fantastic. I think you can find us all on social media if it's not through the channels.
Perfect. And thank you to Dick again for joining us. It was quite, it's always useful to get an outside input. So thank you to you as well.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take care and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
See you all later.